I'm going to take you through an overview of the iDocuments solution. The three modules I'm going to focus on in this overview are the purchasing, the expenses, and also the time modules. There are other modules, but we will look at those in a separate overview. So iDocuments is a web-based solution, so you can access iDocuments wherever you have an internet connection. We can see I'm at the moment logged in as the user called Demo Admin, and we're actually just looking at the home page for that particular user. And that particular user has set up their home page to include a dashboard, also some handy reminders and notifications. So I have a reminder around my last expense claim, and also that I need to review a certain number of purchase orders with overdue delivery dates. We can also see that I have a list of my tasks. So these are all the different tasks which I administer through the iDocuments solution. We also have a handy recent areas section, and also I've set up my particular favorites. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through the purchasing, and I'm just going to start off by adding a new purchase order. So I'm going to do that from the purchasing menu. I could have done it from a favorite if I had set one up. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to select my supplier, and this list of suppliers is actually feeding from SAP Business One, so it's we don't have to create suppliers in SAP Business One and also iDocuments. We create them once in SAP Business One, and then they synchronize with iDocuments. I'm going to select the order type, I'm going to select the item type, and also an order date, and I'm going to leave that as today. I can then also select a document date and a requested delivery date. I can use my calendar accordingly to do that. I'm then also going to select a delivery address, and again this is being synchronized with SAP Business One. We have the default bill to address. It will also read and suggest a particular currency depending on the currency set within SAP Business One for this particular supplier, and it will also feed the exchange rates from SAP Business One too. We can then see who is actually going to end up approving this particular purchase order. So we have approval workflows built into iDocuments. I can then set which group this purchase order relates to. So if I want to purchase for the IT group, or does this purchase relate to the HR group within the company, I'm going to leave this as the IT group. And again I can place delivery instructions, and if I had a contract I could also select that here too. So I'm just going to go ahead now and start to add some of these purchase order lines, and I do that with this area here. So if I just come down to the first line, I can click and select an item, and again all of these items are being fed from SAP Business One, so I just need to enter items in SAP for the users in iDocuments to be able to purchase those items. So I'm going to select flights. I can enter in descriptions and also free text. I can go ahead and just fill out that other information. If this particular supplier doesn't have a price in SAP Business One for this particular item, then we can just go ahead and we can just add that in ourselves. We also have the dimensions which synchronize with SAP Business One as well. So we can go ahead and we can select the relevant dimensions and cost centers. When we're done, we can then simply add a new purchase order line and just go ahead and fill that information out accordingly. At any time, we can also copy selected lines, we can split lines, and we can also delete lines by just selecting which line we want to create that action for. Once we have created our purchase order, we have the option to save it and come back to it at a different time, submit it, and if we are an approver, we'll also be able to approve it. But in this case, I'm just going to submit this purchase order. It's then going to route round the approval process. So if I just log out and log in as a different user who is an approver for those purchase orders, I've just logged in as Carl. We can see under Carl's tasks, he has 9 purchase orders to approve. And if we just drill into that list, we can see here we have a purchase order created today, and if we just click on to that purchase order and drill into the information, we can review the lines. We can look at the history, so I can see who created this purchase order, and then once I'm happy with this purchase order, that I've looked at the information, I can approve, reject, and there is also the option to abandon it altogether. But in this case, I'm actually just going to go through and approve this purchase order. We can now see that it is no longer part of a list to approve, but if I wanted to, I could find that particular purchase order again just by filtering on any of the information within this area. In the background, once we have approved it, we have a synchronizer which is automatically polling throughout the day or at certain times in the day for purchase orders or purchase invoices or expenses. And once that has polled, it will then synchronize the document into SAP Business One. So if we just open up a purchase order, we can see that that purchase order has now been synchronized into SAP Business One. If I just now come back into iDocuments, what we can now do is we can promote that purchase into a goods receipt. So I'm just going to add a goods receipt. I'm going to select the supplier. I'm going to select the receipt type, and I'm just going to enter the date information. I'm going to select where it was delivered, and I'm then just going to come down to select PO. And what we can see in here if we just scroll down, there is the purchase order which we've just created. So I'm just going to select that and click OK. And from here I can choose to, if I need to, I can amend any of these lines. So if it was a part goods receipt, I would just click on the line that wasn't delivered and I would just remove it accordingly through delete GRN line. Or alternatively, if they had part receipted in any of the quantities, we can also amend that information. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to issue this goods receipt onto the system. And again, we have a synchronizer that is automatically polling throughout the day for any goods receipt notes. So if I just come back into SAP Business One and open up the goods receipt PO document, we can now see that that goods receipt is now in SAP Business One. And we can also see that it's linked to the purchase order. If I just click on the base document tab, we can see it opens the purchase order, and we can see that purchase order has now been closed. Both those lines are now grayed out. We also keep the same functionality in SAP Business One with the relationship map. So I can start to see that relationship map is now building up accordingly. If I just close that now, and if I just come back into iDocuments, we now have the option to promote that goods receipt into an invoice. And we can do that in a number of different ways. We can go ahead and we can add a new invoice, exactly the same as we have done with the purchase order and the goods receipt. But we also have the option to work with something called rapid invoice entry. And if I just choose the rapid invoice entry, we have got an OCR scanner whereby iDocuments will scan a mailbox and it will then enter most of that information for us. Alternatively, we have a rapid invoice entry whereby instead of an OCR scanner, we still see an image of the invoice that's been sent by our supplier to a particular mailbox, but we can just go ahead and rapidly enter the information that's held on that invoice into iDocuments, which will then sync into SAP Business One. So in this case, I would look at the invoice and quickly be able to select the supplier. I would then be able to enter the invoice number. I would then be able to come down and select the purchase order, as long as it was on that particular invoice, and if not, I have a list of all the purchase orders that it could relate to. I can then select the document date. I can select also the posting date, and we can see that iDocuments has brought through the lines from that goods receipt and that purchase order. And I can drill into each of those lines and make any changes that I need to accordingly, where it be a dimension, or perhaps something has changed on the quantity, or perhaps the unit price. And I'll just go ahead and change that information. Once I'm happy that everything balances, I can then confirm that by entering the information just here. We can then go ahead and we can just update that information. And we can then save it and come back to it at a different point in time, or we can go ahead and we can submit it. That can then route round to an approver, and once that approver receives perhaps an email that they have an invoice to approve, and they can receive that email at the point a document has been sent for approval, or perhaps if there are lots of documents being added throughout the day, the approver may decide they would prefer to have one email perhaps in the middle of the day or towards the end of the day, summarizing all the different documents which require approval. Or under the My Tasks, they've also got the prompt that they may need to approve a particular document, in this case a purchase invoice. So if we just open up the Approve of Purchase Invoice, and if we just browse through, we can see we've got a purchase invoice that has just been submitted today, And again, I can just drill into that purchase invoice. I can review the information, drill into the lines if I need to. I can just go ahead and I can approve. And again, in the background, automatically polling for purchase invoices that have been added to iDocuments is the synchronizer. And if we just come back into SAP Business One and come into the purchasing module, I can open up the AP Invoices and we can just wait for that purchase invoice to synchronize, which it has done now. And we can see in the bottom that purchase invoice is based on that goods receipt which we just created, and also that purchase order. And again, on a right click, we can actually view the relationship map. I'm just going to close that down and just come back into iDocuments. And I'm just going to log out as Carl, and I'm just going to log back in as the admin user. And what I'm now going to do is I'm actually going to add an expense, because I can see that my last expense was added quite a while ago. So I'm just going to go ahead and select the date, the document date for this expense. I'm going to select the department within the business this expense refers to. That is, of course, if I work in more than one department. And a description. I'm going to say it was a client meeting. And I can see who is going to be approving this expense. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to add an expense line, and I'm going to select the date it was incurred, the description, so perhaps this was a hotel. The business purpose was a client meeting, and the expense type is accommodation. We can see that we have the currencies which are synchronizing from SAP Business One available to us here in iDocuments as well, and it will automatically bring through the exchange rate. I'm just going to enter the transaction amount and also select my dimensions and cost centers accordingly. I'm now going to add that line, and I'm now going to just add a new line. And again, this was a client meeting. And in this occasion, I'm going to select the expense type, which is mileage. I'm going to select the travel date, the details, and it automatically brings up the standard rate of mileage, but iDocuments knows how many miles I've already travelled this year, so it automatically brings up the reduced rate. So I'm going to say I went from London to Edinburgh and I went via York. It was just myself in the car, so I'm just going to change the passengers to be the one, and I'm going to get the route from Google Maps. It automatically calculates the distance, and I'm going to use that calculated distance as part of my expense claim. We can now see that iDocuments just records the total distance I've claimed this year on my mileage. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to close, and I'm now going to submit this. If I wanted to, I could save it and come back at a different time. So I'm just going to click on Submit and click Submit to confirm you have verified all expense receipts. Well, I didn't do that. So this time I'm going to click on the receipts and I'm going to add an attachment for those receipts. So I'm just going to choose a file and I'm just going to grab a receipt. and I'm just going to upload that, and that is now done. So I'm now going to submit and say yes, that's fine. And I'm now going to log out, and I'm going to log in as Carl, who approves those expenses. So again, Carl, under his tasks, he may have received an email to prompt him to come into here, but we can see he has 12 expense claims to approve. So we're just going to open this expense claim up. This is the expense we've just created. We're just going to open it, and we can view, we can click on the receipts, we can view that particular receipt, and once we're happy with it, we can also quickly view the history and see who has submitted it. But once we're happy, we can then come down and we can approve that. And in the background, the synchronizer is running, and it's just polling for expenses. And in this environment, the expenses are being synchronized into SAP as an AP invoice ready to be paid to our employees on the next employee payment run. So if I just scroll back, we can see here there is that particular expense, and we can also open up any attachments, and we can view those if they were attached just there. So finally, I'm just going to come back into SAP Business, into iDocuments, and this time I'm going to again log in as admin, and we're just going to have a look at the timesheets. Again, we have under my tasks, we have that I need to submit some timesheets. So I'm just going to open up those timesheets, and these are all the timesheets I have not yet filled out. So again, we can just open up a particular timesheet. So I'm going to open up this one from this week. And what iDocuments does is it knows our working patterns. So each user has their own working pattern set in iDocuments. And my working pattern is that I work Monday through to Friday, and I work 7 hours every day. If I was part-time and perhaps didn't work Fridays, then my working pattern would just show the Monday through to the Thursday for 7 hours. And my total would therefore be 28. But in this case, as I work a 5-day week and I work 7 hours each day, the total should be 35. And if we took the HR solution, it can also link up to your holidays as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to start to break out how I have actually spent that week working. I'm just going to go ahead and add a new line, and I'm going to say on Monday I didn't spend the whole of those 7 hours working on this particular project. Instead, I didn't spend any hours on the Monday on that particular project. I actually spent 7 hours on this particular project here. So I can just go ahead and I can start filling that out. On Wednesday I spent 3.5 hours on the project for the new office build, and I then spent the rest of the day on this project here for the iDocuments project. And again, we can just go ahead and we can select the particular activity that we were doing on each of those projects. And we can just, and also we can do that for the tasks as well. If I don't fill out the information correctly, so say for example I just put in 6 hours, we can see at the bottom what it will do is it will prompt us that we're missing an hour. So I can just go ahead and I can just add that hour onto a different line. We also have the option to copy last week's timesheet. So if we're doing similar work each week, we can just copy the last week. We can save our timesheets and come back to them at a different date. or we can submit our timesheets. And again, I'm going to submit this timesheet. It will then route through to Carl, who will then be able to authorize that particular timesheet in exactly the same way we just saw with the expenses and the purchasing. So I hope that was a good overview. Just before we leave, I did forget to show we have various reports. So we've got missing timesheets reports. We also have various expense reports. So if we open up one of those, perhaps the expense report, we want to see expense lines with no receipts. So we can remind people to post those receipts against the expenses, perhaps. So I hope that was a good overview. If you'd like any more information or see perhaps a slightly more in-depth overview, please let us know.